Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our bi-monthly builders call. We're going to jump right in the deep end of the pool today and do some skills training on communication that I haven't done before. So, I haven't done it in this context of this call. I've done it many times before, however, just not here. So, we're going to start off in the context of today's call is communication, building communication skills, having ninja communication skills for maximizing influence. So, for those of you that are on the call right now, and those of you that may be catching the recording, I want you to think about just for a moment, get quiet in your mind, and think about experiences that you've had where you were on the receiving end or you were engaged in a conversation where there was communication, where you had an incredible experience, and so much so that you remember that conversation, or you will forever remember that moment. Um, when I think about one of those times, I was at a women's leadership conference, and this is back in February of 2007 to be exact. And there was different groups of women, and the woman that was facilitating had her back to me. And it didn't matter that she had her back to me because she was in a conversation with a larger group of people, and everyone had placed themselves in areas, from like 1 to 100, based on where they were showing up, performing, where they would, rate themselves in their world. And I distinctly remember she asked a powerful question, and she was talking to the people that were in the group that were the group below the ones that were 100%. So there was four groups. So I was in the third group because that's where I'd placed myself. And she said, "What is it that has you that are in the third group that are creating amazing results not allowing yourself to be participating in this group that knows that they're really exercising 100% of the potential and going for it?" And with her back to me, and I was in the group, so I felt like, mixed in. I said, because if I move out of this group, all the people that I love that live in this group, I will leave behind and I'll be alone. And she turned around and didn't say anything. And this is one of the tools and techniques that we're going to talk about today. And she then said, and she looked straight at me, and she just stood and looked at me and waited and waited and waited. And then she said, "Why don't you bring them with you?" So I'd love to get from each of you a time where you've been in a conversation, maybe it was a one-on-one conversation, or maybe it was where you were part of a group conversation, that you have an experience that you can remember that it was like such a high quality experience. And we're going to break down what the anatomy of that was that actually happened in that, so that we can bring awareness to the skills that were being used and utilized, and then we can go replicate those skills. Because the truth is that in business, in interpersonal relationships, everything is relationships. I was talking with somebody yesterday that is like, "Well, it looks like I'm back, we're back in real estate again." And, it was this conversation of how they knew someone that was an agent that was not having a great experience and was not being lifted up. They were being, put down, and that person had a client, and there was this whole thing. And I said, "Well, you may say that you're back in real estate again, except for the truth is it's not really that. It's that you're in relationship. And everything is the relationship, and real estate is an expression of the relationship, in the context of business." So I would love to have anybody that wants to share a time where you were in a conversation where you had such an incredible experience, and what was it that happened for you in that conversation that made it memorable or a meaningful experience. And I'm going to make notes while everyone jumps off mute at the same time wanting to share.
I'll go. So recently I attended an event And several times during that event, people had commented on um, the potential that I had, and I have the potential I have to be successful. That I never actually had that conversation with myself. And so recently, one of the staffers from that week contacted me and said, "Hey, I just want to check in with you because I was in awe at how you just gave so much of yourself to that week and how you didn't wait. You didn't stand and put your toe in the pool, and you just jumped right in and gave so much." And that was profound to me because so many times I realize that I do stand on the edge of the pool and I do just put my toe in, and usually the water is fine. And I know how to swim, and it reminded me that that commitment needs to be 100%, 100% of the time. Because what's the worst thing that happens? The water is cold, my shorts dissolve. Like, what? I mean, all of these things are things that I can handle, or I know people who can help me to, right, get to a shallower part of the pool.
Okay, so if I was to break down the experience that you just had, I would say there was three things. Number one was acknowledgement. Someone acknowledged you by giving you feedback on their experience of you based on their experience. And then
Yes,
what that acknowledgement led to was introspection on your part. And in that introspection, your level of awareness went up. And in you having a greater level of awareness, what then happened is you're feeling called to rise at a different level.
correct.
I love that we're starting with this one. This is like I love this is like so exciting. Okay. So think about this. Sometimes we underestimate the power of a conversation, and when we bring attention to a conversation, the influence that we can have. So if we look at the example that Glenn just gave of a time of a conversation that he can remember that was meaningful for him, this is what happened. It started off with, and we'll put this in the context of a builder's conversation, right? When you're wanting to specifically focus influence as it relates to building, it was a heartfelt, grounded acknowledgement, what we would call edification, right? Then the pause of letting that sink in, not just going through it as a formality, but actually doing that. And when we take the time to acknowledge or edify people, we're making an investment in the emotional bank account for someone. And when we do that in a way that's deeply meaningful, not just surface based on, our experience, what happens or what can happen is that second thing that gets triggered, which is introspection. And when somebody goes into a place of introspection because they have a level of awareness that's now gone up, like Glenn, you said your awareness is, yeah, you're getting this feedback that they experienced you jumping right in and you're playing at 100%, not having your toe in the water. What your awareness was like, oh my goodness, a lot of, I can see areas where I do have my toe in the water or where I'm not 100%. And I chose to be 100% in this week. And that was my intention, or that was, how I showed up in that area. And I have opportunities to go into these other areas at 100%, not toe in the water. So when we are lifting others and when we are investing in others, which is having those deeply meaningful, shares, and it wasn't, this is how you are, it was just my experience of you, right? And what can happen then as that trickle down effect, you've got the introspection, the awareness goes up, and because of who you are called to rise and be better. You did that for yourself. It wasn't someone pushing you. It wasn't someone motivating you. It wasn't someone nudging you. It wasn't someone telling you that you should. You did that for yourself. So think about like that conversation. How long was the conversation that you guys had that you just described?
5 minutes at the most.
5 minutes. And look at the level of influence that was created in those 5 minutes? Huge, right? So there's a formula. Like we're going to just be looking at these different formulas and then I'm going to share some with you as well. Now, there's something that I did and I set it up this way. So how many of you, I know you guys, a lot of you have done Zoom calls where just how many people have coached people on Zoom? Show your hands. How many people have been coached on a Zoom call? Yeah. So a lot of times we are taught in the Zoom world, like, hey, if you're not looking at me, you're not paying attention. You're distracted. You're not present. Does anybody like have that perspective? Yeah. And can that be true?
Sure.
It can be true. And here's the other thing. Before you went to share, what I said to you was, I'm going to be looking down because I'm going to be making notes on what you're saying. So I've created an expectation that I'm going to be engaged with what you're saying and what I'm doing during the time that you're talking. So if we actually look at, I don't know if what's going to be able to see the blurry notes. But as you were talking, I just wrote down acknowledgement, introspection, awareness, rise. Because as you were sharing what you were sharing, I'm like, oh, here's the map. If we put it into one word, I'm listening in context for what you're saying. Now, this is an actual way to have people open up that wouldn't otherwise. So if you can think of like an example, you're having a conversation with someone, and let's say, we're on Zoom, right? And you have a conversation with me that hits a nerve or gets a little bit emotional. I'm either going to, what's going to happen if I hit a, well, let me just turn this around in the form of a question. Joseph, if I hit a nerve with you or get, where things get emotional or they get too close or they get uncomfortable, what would be some different ways that you may respond internally or externally?
That was for me, right, Casey?
Yeah.
Yeah. I may respond with anger.
Okay. Are you going to be more likely to engage or disengage initially?
Disengage.
Disengage. Okay. And when you disengage, what's happening for you inside? You're getting angry, or is there like, I trigger something, you disengage, then what happens?
If we're talking in generalities, then I go into my own little world, right? I disengage. I'm no longer communicating effectively. Yeah, I'm in my own space.
Okay. So essentially what I'm hearing you say is that you've shut down.
Yes.
And then when you come back to engage, because of all that's been triggered, anger may be the thing that you respond with, depending on if you choose to respond that way or some way else.
Correct.
So the reason why this is really important is it is more effective to not be looking at someone in having a conversation like that than it is to be looking at someone. So when I say, I'm going to be making notes and I visibly disengage from you, what it creates now is space for you to have whatever experience that you're going to have without me looking at you. Because when we get uncomfortable emotionally as humans, and we don't want to go somewhere, there's a truth that's been hit on, and something gets triggered where there starts to be an emotional kind of churn, self-preservation is going to be the natural thing that we do out of fight or flight. And when we go into self-preservation, we've lost the ability, instead of being able to lean in and go deeper, we've now disconnected, have a person that's disconnected from us because they're in self-preservation mode. So when you, and this is really effective in person, sitting across the table from someone, when I'm having a really important conversation or a conversation where things may come up or there's going to be, something, my notes are for two reasons. Number one, they're to help me listen in context and look for those words that are the roadmap of what's actually happening. Number two, it's to create emotional space between me and the person that I'm in conversation with, so that I can get as deep as possible with that person, however deep they're willing to go in that moment, so that I can be most effective. And this is counterintuitive to how we're taught so often of like, oh, when we're actually being present with someone, we're sitting and looking at them and it involves eye contact. And if there's no eye contact or we're looking away, we're not interested or we're disengaged. And while that can be true, there's also this whole other space. And so when we talk about ninja skills for communication, and we're putting this now in the context of using influence with agents, there is nobody wants to open up and be vulnerable about what's actually going on in their business or life, perhaps. And if they're going to do that, they're going to do that with their BFF, not you, unless you're their BFF. And so, how do we get to those places with people that they would not otherwise allow us to go to? And so, these are some specific skills to use to create a space to allow that to happen. Now, does it always happen? No. All right. I'm going to go to another example. Anyone that wants to share a conversation that you've been in it was memorable. You felt heard. You had some kind of breakthrough in that conversation. You can go back to it and go, yeah, I remember that. Days, weeks, months, years later. I will give one that triggered something negative, just to, not negative. Rick and I were dating. It's our first year of dating. He's getting ready to fly out to go on a speaking engagement. And we were, initially not exclusive and not committed. Now, that didn't mean I was dating other people in this specific instance. And I didn't realize that he was dating other people in this specific instance. But that's just the arrangement we had because of where we were at. And he's like, no, I don't want that. And I'm like, perfect. I'm working on my business and rebuilding my life from a negative hole that I was crawling out of. And so, but I realized after hanging out with him for 7 months, once a week, like everything we did together was better. And I enjoyed his company. I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to stop hanging out with this guy because I'm never going to meet anybody. And I realized, oh, I think I do want to be in a relationship. So in this conversation, which I remember plain as day at the end of 2008, it's right after Thanksgiving of 2008. So we're going into December. And so I said, hey, like have a great trip. We're in front of Pete's Coffee. We're in front of Pete's Coffee in Pleasanton, out on the curb. And the store, it's closed, and I was going my way and he was going his way back to Fremont. We didn't live together at this point. And I just said, I think that I maybe need to like reconsider, and I basically shared with him what I just shared with you guys. And he looked at me. First he was looking at the ground and he was pacing around, and he didn't say this to me in the face, but he said this to the ground. He said, the thought of being in a monogamous, exclusive relationship with you scares me to death. And then he looked up. And I was like, what? I mean, it was like the craziest thing ever. And I'm like, why? And he's like, because you're so connected and you're so like amazing and blah, 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 all this stuff. And he's like, and then when something happens, you completely shut off and ain't nobody or nobody's army getting through anywhere. Well, do I do that? Yes, I did that a lot at that point in time. I remember that conversation. Why? Because it was an acknowledgement of something that was true in his experience. I could see it was also true for me, but I was like, oh. But yes, it actually was. Right. So what is an experience that someone else on the call has had in conversation? Because we want to break down what the anatomy was of those things. It could be something like that triggered it, that was like, great, or something like Glenn's experience, where it was just an acknowledgement that was lifting, just a conversation that you can think back to, remember, that was pivotal, where there was influence, that had influence on you, over you, with you.
I'll go. It's a recent conversation. I recently moved, and actually you can see it in the picture. There's this red chair behind me. And this is a small space, and that chair doesn't work because you also can maybe see there's a door that's near the chair. And I had called my son and said, hey, when you come to dinner on Sunday, I'd like you to take the chair with you back to your house in San Francisco and hold it for a while. And he was like, okay. And then when he got here, he's like, Mom, you don't want me to hold this like for a couple of days. You want me to take it because you don't have space for it here. And he's like, that's not fair. And he was right. That I didn't set my true expectations. I had this, hey, help me with the problem and solve my problem. And without me getting clear expectations of what I meant by, I'm not emotionally ready to get rid of this lazy boy for my Linus blanket. And at the same time, it's, he was right. I wasn't fully transparent as to my expectations and why.
I love it. So, in that, he held you accountable, which created a greater level of awareness of where you were at with truth. And that gave you the option to clean up that relationship and be clear.
Correct.
All right. So we put this in the context of building, talking with agents. Here's the question is, how often do you lean in to telling someone what's true that is going to hold them accountable when you know it's not going to be what they want to hear because they don't really want to look at the entirety of what is actually true?
How often do I do that?
It was rhetorical, right?
Yes.
Right? Because putting that in the context, right? So your son has a relationship with you where it's, he's at the age or stage in his life. And the reason why many people won't do that is because it will trample on their not wanting to be not liked, right? So if they're high I's, high S's, like to say something that's true that would hold someone accountable, that could possibly have somebody not be happy with you or push back in the moment because of all of those dynamics. Now you're risking a natural behavioral style for somebody that wants to be liked or wants approval. And so a lot of times people won't do that. But if we look at this in the context of your son is like, hey, it's a different dynamic in that relationship. He loves you. And so he is willing to be honest and truthful, knowing that it's, whatever your response reaction is going to be, is your response to reaction. So when we think about influence as it relates to being willing to go there in conversations with agents and building, if we're having people like really empty their cup, and Selena and I were texting about this. Have you guys ever seen the cup illustration of 2 full glasses of water? Yay, nay.
Is one dirty and one clean? That one?
No. So
Okay.
just imagine these are both filled to the brim. And this is your prospect, and this is you, and both of these glasses of water are full. And if you're in a prospecting conversation sharing with someone and your cup already overfloweth and theirs is full, what happens when you pour into them? It runs all over the floor.
Right. Flows up front, right.
Because there's no space. So if you're going into a prospect conversation and you've got a full cup and you've got a full cup, you've got all this stuff going on personally in your business, whatever, and you take time to empty your cup, maybe that is having a conversation with someone, maybe that is a workout, maybe that is a meditation, maybe that's just getting present and focused before you go into the conversation and you go in with an empty cup. And then they do most of the talking because you're facilitating them sharing. The person who's listening is the person who holds all the cards, and they can share because they've got a cup to pour into. Now there's space in their cup, like literally, right? they've shared, they have space. I mean, can you guys think of conversations that you've had where it's a 30-minute call? Let's say you've scheduled a 30-minute call and the call gets set up and literally the person talks all the way to the bottom of the hour when it's time to get off the call and it's been a monologue. And at the end of it, that person's like, oh my gosh, this was the greatest conversation. Thank you so much for your time today. I can't wait to get, can pick up where we left off. And you're like, yeah, I didn't say 2 words. They did all the talking, right? And so that is so important because most people aren't being heard somewhere. So if we're doing a really good job of having people empty their cups, we can create a safe space and just say, listen, it's important. Like what you're going to share with me is important. I'm not looking at you because I'm making notes. It doesn't matter if I'm sitting across the table from you at Starbucks or if we're sitting on Zoom and here I am and I'm going to be making notes. And I could facilitate a conversation with you paying attention. I actually prefer to have coaching calls not on Zoom so that we take away this visual dynamic and don't even have it be an issue because it's a distraction to see like, oh, what's going on with their face? What's going on with their body language? What just happened? What just shifted? No, like that's a distraction to me. Like I want to be like so energetically connected in a conversation without the visual distractions and create this wide open vessel and space where someone will empty, 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 empty. And the more they empty, the more I can see how I can help and support them where they're at. The challenge, if you guys would agree, and that we face in really influencing and building is when people won't let us in. And we get the surface stuff about what's going on in their business or life. And then we're attempting to offer solutions on surface things that because they haven't opened up or haven't been willing to go deep with us about what's real, we're not able to really be in a place of influence with them. And so that is the precursor, that is the step that is important for that to happen before we can establish any kind of influence with people and be solutions for them. And then once we have, being willing to step in Katie's scenario where there is some honesty and accountability, and it could be in the form of a question, right? And that question could be, Katie, if you keep doing what you've been doing in the way that you've been doing it 3 to 5 years from now, what in your life is going to be different?
Love that question.
So it doesn't, a lot of times we think about influence in the ability to say the right thing or be really smart or share all the good stuff so that we can prove our value by, emptying our cup of information and value on someone when that's really not what they need at all. They need someone that knows how to facilitate a conversation where they feel safe to be able to really empty what's true for them. And now they have an ally, not someone that's there to fix it, but someone that's there as an ally and a resource for them. And being willing then to ask the questions or say the things that may be confrontive. And it's not what we say, it's how we say them, right? Because you could ask the question, I could ask that question the same way and be like, Katie, I mean, come on. If you keep doing things the way you've been doing them, 3 to 5 years from now, what's going to be different in your life and your business? Same question, asked differently. Versus an important question asked neutrally that now creates space for us to go even deeper off of what she shared. So there's one thing that happened at the end of that just now that I want to highlight, and it's called the pause. How many of you know what the pause is? Tell me what the pause is, Katie.
The pause is letting that question sink in. When you ask a very direct question like that, it gives it a little bit more power with the pause. It's called, I learned it in Toastmasters, the power of the pause. And it also gives people an opportunity to process and to let it really work and give them a chance to think in the quiet space.
Yes. So how many of you have been in, that when you have awareness of the pause, have been in situations where there are people that are so uncomfortable with the silence, they step on the pause and just keep going or ask another question or blah, 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 right? Because that space is like, oh my gosh, it's been 2 seconds. It's been 5 seconds. It's like, oh, what's happening? Now I'm nervous. Are they mad? Did I do, did I push it too far? Like, and so we talk when we're not comfortable with the pause versus allowing the pause to be the pause. Pause is one of the most powerful uh, tools in communication for influence because what it communicates is that you're standing energetically, completely grounded and not attached. And in this
Can I do
context,
a,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say this, so when I first learned this about 25 years ago, and I'm not, I'm still a work in progress, because, but learning to get comfortable with that pause, how I started it for myself is I started saying the alphabet backwards in my head, just to give it the space, just like, okay, I know I need to let this sit and let them have a space to, it's also if you're closing for the next step, it's also a good opportunity for that too, just have that pause. And it would drive me crazy at first. I've gotten a little better, but if I catch myself wanting to speak, I start saying the alphabet backwards in my head. It's just a little trick I learned.
That's great to get yourself reeled in. So the pause becomes an important tool at any point in time when you use it. And how I was taught the pause is whoever speaks first after the pause is the one that is being influenced, not the one that is influencing. And um, now if we put this in the context of keeping this, in the context of building, recruiting, attraction, agent attraction people, there is all kinds of scenarios where this comes into play. I was on, we had somebody recently exit our organization this year that a few months ago reached out. I had reached out actually, passing on a referral, a real estate referral. And it opened up this, conversation that was a conversation that was, just between the two of us. And this person is not somebody that I would say is like a sharer or super, you know, not doesn't wear their heart on their sleeve, more private, not somebody that would be vulnerable or emotional at all. It was a guy actually, and we ended up having a 2-hour conversation on me just reaching out to pass a real estate referral, and we had a conversation that I dug into with this person, and used the skills that we've talked about today and kept uncovering and uncovering and uncovering and uncovering. And what got to the bottom of it was, yeah, I don't like what is, and I may stay here, I may leave. Well, and it's somebody that has a lot of agents in their organization, relatively speaking. And so my question was, at this, juncture in the conversation, do you view yourself as someone that wants to be part of the problem or part of the solution? And the ego part said, I want to be part of the solution. And so my question was, are you open to a recommendation? And earlier in the conversation, I said, how many of these things do you know for a fact versus they're things that you think based on what you have, experienced? Well, it's what I think. Okay, great. So can we agree that it's possible that what you think is completely not true? It might be, it could be, right? It could be true. And it also could not be true. Do we agree? Yeah, we agree. Okay, great. So and that's called flipping the coin. So it's one extreme or the other. And so this is another, skills thing in communication. It's the full give, it's the full takeaway. And when someone is in a place where they're in one of those areas, how to get someone back to some kind of middle is the equal opposite extreme as a communication and coaching skill, for to create space, just like in the cups, for something else to come in, right? So I've, and I could recap because I had pages and pages of notes. So, you know, what you're bothered about is X, Y, Z, and based on everything that you've seen, you believe bop, 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 bop. Yep, exactly. And that's why I would choose not to stay in this organization, even though, I like other people and da da da, this like whatever, right? Okay, great. So now I know all of these things and they're over here. So when we do that's the full give. Now we do the full takeaway, which is, and is it possible all of those things are true? What you think? Yep. And is it also possible that none of them are true? What you think? Because we haven't asked and we don't know. Yeah. Okay, so now I've got somebody that energetically is off being positioned and it's in the middle. So in ninja communication skills, if we're doing the full give or the full takeaway, now we've got to have something that we give someone next, right? So in this conversation and building is in the context of retention, right? If it's in the context of an agent, that's not yet with the company, and they're like, let's call that their objections or their things about why they're not here with us yet, and we've got those list of things. Instead of going into those list of things, okay, so the reasons why you're not here or the things that, has you not here yet are X, Y, Z. Yep. Instead of putting any energy in those and having a conversation about those, the full takeaway or the full give in that instance would be, okay, let's assume all of those things are handled and that they're no longer issues. Tell me why you would. Why would you be here? And now we've completely neutralized the energy of why not. And we're building energy and evidence. I'm not building it. I'm not convincing anybody. It's coming from that individual. And now the more question, oh, okay, da da da. Well, what would that mean for you? And how's that gonna impact your family? And what's that gonna mean for your business? And for all the reasons why they would, now they are enrolling themselves and building value. And the more value they build for themselves, because sometimes we get in this situation where it's like, man, oh, what's my job? And you'll hear it all the time. People that are generally selling stuff will tell you, oh, your job's to provide value. Provide value, provide value. I'm going to give you free value and then you can buy my training program. Value, value, value. Give people value. And so I know me in the past, I would be like, oh my God, my job's to provide value. Except for in ninja communication, what if my job is to ask the questions and the other person builds value for themselves? Because I'm able to facilitate a conversation. And all of a sudden, they're not experiencing me pushing them towards something or feeling like it's my personal agenda or me wanting them, more for them than they want it for themselves. Like they are enrolling themselves in the value for themselves because I'm going deeper and deeper and deeper into the value that they see and how that's going to actually translate. And so now when it comes to it energetically, that person has shifted inside. And so what they look at as the challenges, obstacles, or reasons why they're not here yet with us are not going to feel the same to them. And when they revisit them, because they built the value for themselves through a dialogue that's been facilitated, it can come back to a different place in the conversation and they've more than likely moved themselves forward without you being on the hook to make the value to them. Well, tell me why I should, right? They've just told themselves. So these like different layers of working with people, like to me, this is why I love enrollment. It's why I love attraction. It's why I love recruiting. It's why I love sales, because it's not having a script to sell somebody on something. It is starting to understand, like, what are the things as people that we lean into, that we lean out of? How do I be a person that's the ninja person that stands in the middle as a facilitator for a communication experience that's going to have influence with another person, that's going to have me, stand out in their mind or be someone that now they're looking at differently because of how they've experienced me in that conversation. And the ability to build that kind of trust and credibility in the saying less and doing less, but being very intentional in what I am saying and what I am doing. So I know that was a lot of information and just different perspectives to feed into. So would love to hear from you guys. Just what came up, what were some ahas, what were things that maybe you hadn't thought of before or that you had forgotten of that's like, oh yeah, it was a great reminder, just anything in the conversation that's come from today so far.
I had an agent attraction meeting last week, and I'm new to this, but they're attracted, so I have the conversation. And actually, Katie said, take a notebook with you and make notes. And that's not typically the way I operate because I feel like it should be a conversation. And if I'm taking notes, it doesn't feel as much as a conversation. But I did. I took my notebook and I took notes. And I said, I'm just going to write some things down so I don't forget it. And, as we got later in the call or because it was face to face in the coffee shop, as we got further in our discussion, I actually flipped my note pages back to where I took notes. I asked, what were your three, if I could grant your three wishes, what would they be? And I actually flipped back. I said, you know what, you told me in the very beginning of our conversation that you wanted to make more money. And she said, "Oh, you're right, I did." But like it was interesting how my notes even reminded her of what she had said earlier. But it was it was a great way just to show that I was paying attention. But you never thought of me taking notes gives them an opportunity to not have to make that eye contact or feel like they have to be on on show. They can just talk and be themselves.
Yeah, I love that. And think about any time where you've emptied your cup. Like, I know when I call my girlfriend Jennifer and I'm like, Jennifer, I need to empty my cup. Like, you got 15 minutes. And she'll be like, I got 15 minutes, go. And I'm like, blah, 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 blah. I am not sharing anything for the sake of remembering any of it. I am sharing it for the sake of getting it out of my body, right? But I know what she's doing on the other end is because she's like trained herself so well to listen. She's not doing it with a notepad, but she's looking to grab the key things of what I'm saying. And then, it may be just I needed to empty my cup and she may just be like, hey, want a different perspective? Or, something came up for me while you were sharing that. Would you like to know what it is? And sometimes I'll say, yeah, nope, I gotta go. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, tell me what it is. Or yeah, a different perspective. Like I want to be challenged on like, particularly uh when I'm really have an emotional attachment to what I'm emptying my cup about. Right.
I found I have to ask my husband that. Like sometimes he'll come and he'll just dump, and I'll ask him, "Did you just want me to listen, or do you want me to give you feedback? Which is it?" He'll be like, sometimes it's both ways. What should I do, or what would you do in this situation? Or no, I just need to talk.
yeah,
Okay, got it.
yeah. Love that. All right. Who else?
I love what you said, Glenn, because my daughter and I have that where she'll call and she'll say, can you talk? And I'll say, am I listening to respond or am I just listening to listen? And she'll say, you're just listening to listen. I don't need you to respond. I don't need you to give me advice. I don't need you to give me anything. I just want you to listen. And I'm like, excellent. I'm all ears. She's like, I don't want you to give me any feedback, like don't give me advice. Like she's 26, so like I couldn't possibly give her advice she would listen to anyway. But that's how we do it. She's like, I'm just calling because same thing, emptying the cup, right? So something to carry forward in probably all of our relationships.
Yep. And there is, until someone can actually get the words out of their mouth, there's some people that are like verbose communicators that never shut up. And sometimes it's like, what are you actually saying? Because you're just talking and taking airspace. You're not actually saying anything. And they're just used to like talking all the time, right? And for those people to empty their cup, they're like emptying their cup all the time. But there's a lot of people that are geared differently that won't unless someone asks, and definitely won't if there's not a space to do it. And because if you think about how a lot of communication goes and someone's like, hey, how you doing? Like, oh, I'm fine. Right. And we was having this conversation with my trainer yesterday at the gym, and he said, oh, cool. I'm like, what does that actually, like, what does that mean? I'm like, that's when someone says they're fine. I'm like, and he's like, what do you mean? And I go, if I ask you how you are and you tell me you're fine, I'm like, what that says to me is effed up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. I'm fine. Everything's fine. Right. And like, so it's important to remember that we can be vessels that create a space for people to open up, to share. And until someone is actually verbalizing things for themselves with words coming out of their mouth, some people will process internally before verbalizing externally, and other people will verbalize externally to help them process internally. Regardless of which one someone is, actually speaking it is really important. And so when we look at like that, okay, how am I going to be more effective and influence, like having more influence as a result of how I'm participating with, agents I'm in conversation with, agents that aren't with us, agents that it's a retention conversation. Oh, by the way, the person that I mentioned earlier that decided to leave the organization never was willing to have a conversation. In the absence of not being willing to have a conversation, there's not that person that, whether they want to be that or not, has now made themselves part of the problem, because the only way things can get resolved is in communication and having a conversation. Right. So in that case, I don't look and I go, oh my goodness, what could we have done? What could I have done to save this from happening? The answer is nothing, because of how that person was not willing to participate, play, or show up to be part of the solution. And so, as so much of, and in, when you're building and growing large organizations, it's going to be the management of your own energy over time, particularly as you invest emotionally and time and otherwise in the people that you're working together with. And just knowing like, hey, when I'm operating out of a toolbox and a skill set, and I'm using the tools and the skills, and I'm being intentional with them and how I use them in conversation, people are going to do what people are going to do, right? And my role, my responsibility is to be the most skilled that I can be and continue to practice those skills, be in the deep end of the pool, like you were talking about, Glenn. Knowing that anytime I'm in that kind of a conversation or any conversation with someone, it's like someone's life is on the line, right? Someone's future is on the line. And so those are important conversations. All right. Any other shares, comments, feedback, questions before we wrap it for today? All right. So recap is never underestimate the value of acknowledgement. Yes, words of affirmation is a love language for many people. In the context of Builders Bootcamp and what we do with attraction and recruiting, we call it edification. And that can lead to introspection, which leads to a greater level of awareness where someone calls themselves to rise, and we are their rising partner. We walk that journey with them, not for them. The second thing that we talked about was being willing to know how important it is to come to a conversation with intention and an empty cup personally, so that we can be a vessel for someone else to empty their cup. Not that we take other people's stuff on, just that we're in a space where whatever we've got in our cup is not going to distract, dilute, or take away from where we're at in conversation with someone else. And that as then they empty their cup, we have the opportunity to be radically honest, which shows up as accountability and telling the truth. And in that, being somebody who can influence another person, really they're going to influence themselves by someone willing to take a stand and tell them the truth, where a lot of people may back down because they don't want the conflict, they don't want to risk not being liked, or a host of other things that could be going on for them personally, where they make it about themselves instead of really making it about the individual they're with. We talked about the value of breaking eye contact and making notes to create a space where you can go deeper with people, in addition to having something to circle back to, Glenn, like you did, and what they had forgotten that they said because they were so wrapped up in what they were sharing. However, they said it, and so a place to come back to in the conversation. And then the value of the pause and a well-placed question, and knowing like, at any moment in time, all of these are tools, right? In there, we've got the full give and the full takeaway to be able to help shift somebody energetically without having to go up against objections or, be fighting against somebody that's strongly positioned in some way, and really just neutralize that to create movement. And so all of these are ninja skills that when you put them into practice in your relationships, and obviously we're talking about, attraction, recruiting, building, however it works with buyers and sellers, for sure is going to work with your kids, absolutely is going to work with your significant other, and anywhere where you want to create, better, deeper, more meaningful relationships. And it does not require the other person to have any of these skills. I'm going to say that again. Does not require the other person to have any of these skills, because when you have the skills, it does not matter the skill level of the person on the other side, because you have everything that you need. I think about it like tools in a quiver, or arrows, with a bow and arrow, the quiver that you carry the arrows in. Like, you have everything that you need to move through and navigate and facilitate those conversations, and where someone's going to land is, where they're going to land. There's that horrible statement that says, people never forget how you make them feel. And that is, it's impossible to make anybody feel anything, period. And when we recognize like how someone's going to feel is going to be based on how they view the world, what they choose to write a story around, like there's none of you could say anything right now that would make me cry. You couldn't say anything that would make me laugh. Like, that's going to depend on the filter that it goes through, and how I think about it, and what I, choose to make meaning about it, and all those things that have to happen before I have any kind of a response. So when we get that people are going to be having their own experiences all the time, and then we've got skills and tools that they don't need to know about, we don't need to talk about it, we don't need to tell them, we just show up in that way. You give people an experience, and when you continue to give people an experience different from the experiences they're used to having with everyone else, because not a lot of people have those kind of skills at a high level, then you automatically are going to continue to have more and more and more influence, as people can get that with you. So want to acknowledge everybody that's on the call today, or that's listening to this in the recording, because it is really true. And I've just been thinking about this a lot. Like, we're growing or dying. That's the bottom line. And without having an intentional growth plan of how am I going to be better, how am I going to continue to learn and to expand, I know that I'm going the opposite direction. And so you showing up and participating is evidence of a growth mindset and an appetite for growth. So I'm excited to continue. This Friday, this is definitely something you're going to want to get out to your organizations. The Free Friday Coaching Call is Curtis Shewell, and he does a thing with his group that he's going to do for our group, which is $1,000 to anyone who can stump him with an objection around production, mindset, or recruiting on this Free Friday Coaching Call. So get all your people there. It's going to be fun. We will be, I have a promotional video I'll be putting out later today, so that you can start to get that to your groups and your organizations, and we'll see you then. Love you guys.